exactly. The only difference was the lines that come off the cross were angled, I think, in one and not in the other, but otherwise they were. Yeah, they were. I called Justin at
So we're just, if you guys want to grab a seat, we're going to get started. And I've started the stream, so yeah, give Paul a call.
Off, what do you think?
Thank you.
Hey Paul, it's Steve. Okay, I'm going to put you on speaker and we're going to get going in a couple minutes, okay? Okay.
Should we just go in 1 minute?
Paul will get going in about 1 minute.
All right, great, thanks.
There's something that's on it that says, hey, you know,
It's like cycling through the copay. Just working on it. Okay, we're gonna go on.
welcome and good evening to our copay discussion. We're glad you could make it, either live here in Toronto or via YouTube. I would encourage you all to listen to our speakers tonight, tell us your thoughts, or ask questions. We're very grateful you took the time to call in this evening. Earlier this year, the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care took a bold step for the first time in 20 years, proposed some changes to income testing for seniors, the deductible and co-payment amounts. This got a lot of pharmacists talking again. Maybe now is finally the time we can reverse the trend of the past 20 years and create a movement amongst pharmacists to restore the practice of charging the patient the co-payment amount. But in the end, the only thing that changed was the income testing amount. So the initiative definitely cooled off. Tonight we'll be exploring the issue from a few different angles, whether this practice might ever change and bring perspective from 3 Canadian pharmacy leaders. The regulatory language that was the genesis of this practice all started with the word may, where the pharmacy regulations stated that pharmacists may waive the copay. Practice was never made mandatory. It's important that everyone know that we are not recommending that you waive or don't waive the copay. Our role here is to facilitate dialogue and discussion, not to direct your business. As owners, it's really up to you to decide what's best for you, your patients, and your business. But before we get going with our speakers, a couple of housekeeping notes. We are live streaming this on YouTube tonight, and we'll be taking questions from those of you that are participating online. So simply post your question in the YouTube live chat or tweet using the hashtag #MayWaiveCopay. We are also recording this and we'll be making this available for streaming for those of you who are not able to attend tonight in person or listen live. So now some introductions. To my immediate right, Doug Brown, Pharmacy Manager of Pharmacy Associates in Port Perry. Doug has over 26 years of pharmacy experience in community pharmacy and is a well-known contributor in Ontario to the pharmacy profession through his work with the association and the University of Waterloo, amongst many other activities. Doug is currently a manager of his store in Port Perry and is a member of Whole Health Pharmacy Partners. Next to Doug is Alan Mallow, the Senior Vice President of Professional Affairs at the Ontario Pharmacists Association. Alan is the pharmacy lead on professional affairs interfacing with provincial, national, and international stakeholders. In his role, Alan manages OPA's health policy, economic, operational, and professional development initiatives that aim to facilitate pharmacist delivery of the best possible care for their patients while helping to entrench OPA's position as the authoritative role and voice of pharmacy in Ontario. And finally, joining us on the phone tonight is Paul Blanchard, the Executive Director of the New Brunswick Pharmacists Association. Paul leads the advocacy work for the organization and has extensive experience representing the voice of pharmacists in the province, working across governmental and industry partners. Now, you might be wondering, why do we have someone from the New Brunswick Pharmacists Association on the line? Well, pharmacists in New Brunswick faced a similar challenge in 2014 and had significant momentum around this very topic. But it's a very, very interesting story that Paul tells, and it's a nice way to kick off tonight's discussion. So once again, just wanted to remind everybody, this is not a recommendation to either waive or not waive the copay, simply a discussion forum on the topic and hoping to get your input. So Paul, I'm going to start by opening this up to you, and as I said in my opening comments, I think it's an incredibly interesting story that pharmacists in New Brunswick had going a couple of years back, and certainly would like to hear from you.
Great, thanks, Dean, and thanks to your team for putting this together and giving the context for the time. I guess I'll try to quickly walk through our experience here in New Brunswick. So in our province, we've been without an agreement with the provincial government going back to 1995. So it was kind of a watershed moment for us to have an agreement negotiated in 2014. And
Great. Well, thank you very much, Paul. And indeed, you're invited to stay on the line. We're going to move on to our next speaker, Doug Brown. And Doug, as a practicing pharmacist today, has got interesting perspective on the topic. So, Doug, over to you.
Thank you. Well, it's a difficult decision. I worked in a couple of different practices over my career. 22 years in a franchise corporate practice that initially we weren't waiving co-pays, and we commanded actually a significant market share in our community. Just to sort of reference things, I do come from a small town of about 15,000 people. We do have a draw area of about 40,000, but nonetheless extremely competitive. We were one of 5 pharmacies in this town, and we were at the time the only pharmacy collecting copays and commanded a significant market share, certainly well above the majority. I like to think it's because of the people, the professional services, and the choice of patient. They felt that it was worth it. And that was in an environment where we have the cost base in the world, we have all the other waivers that are out there, and we still manage to be the pharmacy of choice for all intents and purposes. Now, recently making a change and moving into independent practice, it was a very challenging decision. Since that time, in my former practice, we waived until 2012, or we collected until 2012, and a corporate decision was made at that point, whereby we all started taking copay. And there was, in my opinion, some market changes in the industry, not just locally within my business, but for sure within the industry as a whole as a reaction to this, because it was quite a large number, a big chunk of the market that started to really. So when I started in my new practice, and we were trying to decide would we waive copays or would we collect, we took everything into account. We did a business case analysis, we looked at the professional aspects, we looked at the advocacy role, and for me, it really all came together and said, you know what, I think it makes sense from every aspect to do so.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Doug. And now, representing and playing the role of Donald Trump this evening, it's Alan Malik, our Senior Vice President of Professional Affairs at the Ontario Pharmacists Association.
Thanks for inviting me to participate. For those of you who know me, you probably acknowledge that I tend to speak very frankly, and I can sometimes be a bit provocative. I'm going to go out and almost apologize if I perhaps offend anyone with any of my comments. Please understand, it is with the best interests of our profession that I make my comments. And these comments are fueled in 4 ways. First, by my past history as a pharmacy manager and as an owner. Second, as in my current role as a senior OPA executive, and I deal with government and economic policy every single day of my professional life. Third, my comments are fueled by what I understand and what I believe government sees and observes from their business behaviors. And fourth, I believe I speak with my passion and my vision for the profession. Let me start with a takeaway message, and that is professional associations. I look to organizations like the New Brunswick Pharmacy Association, the Ontario Pharmacists Association, and indeed any professional association across the country. Professional associations do not have the power to mandate collection of copays. We can do it, we can try and will it, we can keep our fingers crossed, but quite honestly, these are business decisions that only pharmacy owners can make. There's a couple of truisms that I want to be able to address today. One is that we need to acknowledge that, as much as we might like to think so, governments didn't do this to us. And certainly I can speak from the Ontario perspective. The Ontario government didn't do this to us. Copay waiving is our creation. we did this. In fact, it started almost right from the outset in 1996 when copays and deductibles were introduced into Ontario. So the question is one of who started it. That's a common question that we get. Quite frankly, I'd like to shut that question down. I really don't care personally if it was an independent or a corporate group that started this, because quite honestly, what's happened in the past is the past. We need to find ways to move forward. It's what we do collectively that's going to make the difference for us and for the sustainability of our businesses. What I like to look at copays as not being in, or there's a, let me rephrase that. There's a body of study that suggests that copays and deductibles are actually not in the patient's best interest, because what they do, copays and deductibles tend to decrease drug utilization. What happens is sometimes, especially for patients who live paycheck to paycheck, some of the financial decisions are being made that may impact whether a patient fills a prescription or does not fill a prescription. And so these are very important impacts that we need to look at. When the Ontario government implemented the copay deductible model, it was done to help sustain the drug system, and I think there's something that's quite logical about that. We can't possibly expect governments to pay for absolutely everything in our healthcare system. If they did, the system would very quickly collapse. Or in order to pay for all those services, our tax rates would probably soar through zero. Second truism is that we need to understand that governments tend to act in ways that will get them reelected. When we think about and talk about asking the government to mandate copay collection, quite simply, that's counterintuitive to the government's role. And the electorate does not seem to react very well when costs are offloaded to them. And if you need any convincing of that, like Hume's opening statement, just take a look at the about face that the government did with the Ontario budget plan earlier this spring when they refused to go down that path of increasing deductibles and increasing the copay. Third truism is that government has zero interest, quite simply, zero interest in protecting our business model. And that's a tough message to accept, but it's most likely the harsh reality that we face. Basic business training tells anyone who's an owner that if you don't evolve, you will wither and you'll die. And this applies in particular to companies like organizations like pharmacies who live in a highly competitive marketplace. And furthermore, I think it's important to know that despite cries of our inability to sustain ourselves because of this situation, because of the copay situation, the net number of pharmacies, certainly in the province of Ontario, has not actually dropped, it's actually grown. And so what this suggests is that the closures that we warn government of time and time again, they're not happening. And so what's happening is government sees the growth of the number of pharmacies and realizes that the unsustainability message that we keep using, it's starting to fall on deaf ears. I think also we need to understand that with a high degree of regulation in our system, and Ontario is God knows, is one of the most regulated, if not the most regulated jurisdiction. We've got a high degree of regulation on the ODB fee, on the markup, and on the drug price. So really, competition has nowhere to go except to copays and deductibles, because they're probably the only variable part of the equation. But I would challenge that. I wonder if copays and deductibles are indeed the only variable part of the equation. I would suggest, again, to cite almost Business 101 messaging, service differentiation will certainly help and will make you stand out and will differentiate your pharmacy. I think everyone needs to ask themselves why they're waiving. Most often, in most situations, it's probably because of competition. It's probably because your pharmacist colleague 2 blocks down is waiving, and you need to reciprocate and do the exact same thing in order to compete, in order to prevent loss of clientele. there's a downward spiral that's being created, and the way I see it, it only ends once copays and deductibles and service fees drop to zero, because at that point there's nowhere else to go, unless of course we try to find ways to force the stopping of the waiving of copayments. What we see from pharmacies doing though, in order to compensate and to insulate themselves from the waiving practice, what they do is they tend to trim operating expenses. And what that does is, as a trickle down, is that it sacrifices some of the quality and some of the provision of the professional services that we work so hard to deliver. And all in the name of driving script volume, which ultimately pays nothing in the end. So the problem here is we see no differentiation, everyone's waiving, and what's happened is we turn patients into customers, and customers tend to value price over quality. If this is true, then loyalty actually goes out the window, and customers will just get to wherever we go on prices. So let me close by mentioning two last points. I'll reiterate what I said at the beginning. OPA doesn't have it within its power. Same with other professional associations. It's not our decision. These are business decisions. We meet regularly with governments. We try and push for funded scopes of practice expansion, for fair and reasonable fees, such as a dispensing fee that escalates with the rate of inflation. But this type of advocacy will fail pretty much 100% of the time, so long as pharmacies continue to demonstrate that they don't need the copay dollars. So it makes our advocacy efforts very, very difficult. Finally, it's time to stop trying to keep up with the waivers. And I think, from a consumer perspective, price really only becomes an issue when there's an absence of value. So we need to find ways to take price out of the equation, and we need to find ways to differentiate ourselves and differentiate our businesses through great patient care. Will these decisions be easy? Absolutely not. Will you lose customers by making these hard decisions, by starting to charge your copays the money that you earn and that you deserve? Will you lose patients? Probably. I know I did when I was practicing, and I had to make those hard decisions. And I worked for an organization that refused to waive, and patients left. But you know what? Some patients stayed. Why? They stayed because they value the service that my pharmacy staff delivered. And that, it's true to say that some patients will actually come back when they realize that they're going to get the care they need from you. We need to focus less on driving transactional dispensing, a service that doesn't differentiate and that basically pays zero. We need to shift to more patient-focused care and professional services, but we have to make sure that we charge for it. No one wants to work for free. Doctors do it, and so you can too. It's going to be hard to ask patients to pay. It may just be an initial awkwardness, and that's probably just basically a perception that we have, and it's the fear of rejection. But you know what? It takes just a few wins to generate that confidence, and it does become infectious. So it's time to make some bold decisions. Let's take back control of the profession and the business of pharmacy. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Doug. Alan, just kind of expand on that a little bit. You talked a lot about advocacy and the impact that waiving of a copay has negatively on our profession and some of our advocacy efforts over the past few years. What kind of efforts does it take to move a government to the next level? I mean, will simply this do it, or is there other aspects that pharmacy is not doing? Like, I mean, we've for the longest time said, we have to tell our story because we probably don't speak loud enough about it. So maybe I'll go to you, Alan, and then Paul, I'll get your perspective from New Brunswick as well.
Well, it's a great question, Dean. Certainly, advocacy has, and the advocacy that we do at OPA, that Paul does with New Brunswick, and that every professional association is undertaking, it's imperative to keep those going, to seek fair and reasonable funding for the services that you, as your pharmacists, want to provide. They want to be enabled to do more for their patients. So we hear this survey after survey will tell us that pharmacists like the expanded scope of practice. So what this does is it will help to, I guess the stopping of the waiving allows us to have a more honest discussion. What we hear in the presence of waiving, as I mentioned earlier, you have, I guess, knee-jerk types of reactions by pharmacy owners. I'm not saying all, but many pharmacy owners will try and trim their expenses in order to cover the lost revenues that they could have been collecting through the copays. So they may trim overlap. They may cut their hours of operation. They may cut their support staff by either not hiring sufficient pharmacy assistants or technicians, or not even hiring technicians and utilizing lower cost pharmacy assistants. I learned the hard way when I started my pharmacy, my first pharmacy. I used pharmacy assistants, and I got what I paid for. And I quickly shifted, and I moved to technicians, and it made all the difference. But if we can live with a new sustainable model in a world where there's no waiving of copays, all of a sudden the advocacy messages around scope of practice, whether it's injections, whether it's prescribing for minor ailments and the like, all that messaging starts to become a little bit more profound and a little bit more tolerable and acceptable to government.
And Paul, maybe agree or not agree, and maybe your perspective, and add to that if possible.
I agree with most of what Alan's saying. I guess, just in terms of the payer's context or their perspectives on things, and what people's perceptions are of pharmacists in general, we've done, as an advocacy body, we've done focus groups here, we do surveys and so on. So we have the surveys that you see constantly where pharmacists are highly trusted. When you ask people in that context, as a health professional, they absolutely value the services that pharmacists provide, right? But then when you start talking about money, their brain switches over to the business person. And so the public has this complexity with respect to healthcare in Canada and the payment component. So it's a little confusing. In fact, oftentimes when I meet with politicians here, on the one hand, they absolutely accept the health discussions, and then 5 minutes later, they'll be asking, if you could put a team in a golf tournament for a fundraiser, because they have a tendency to see you as a sponsor, not necessarily as a health professional. And I think we're unique in that. I don't think they see nurses or physicians in that context. So, just providing that in terms of some background. The waiving of copays tells payers that we make lots of money and we don't need their money. So that's a bad message, and I think Alan's done a good job of discussing that. I mentioned earlier that copay policies that have a fixed fee are also bad because it disconnects the consumer and the patient from the actual cost of the drugs and the variations that are happening within the drug plan. And Alan's point earlier about people not having the ability to pay, and so you have to keep that in mind. In the U.S., we see that especially people just don't get their prescriptions filled. The plan designs here in Canada are a little more sympathetic and recognize you usually have an annual cap in terms of what your copays can be and so on. And so I think that's an important piece. And ultimately, from a payer's perspective, and as an budgets, right? So they're spending 25% of their budget to end on 2% of the prescriptions, and that's only going to get worse. And so when we were there talking at an advocacy group, knocking on their door, asking for expanded services or asking for fees for certain things, they just rate what they have in their mind, right? So, we're trying to find solutions and collaborate with those groups, with them in terms of making sure that our healthcare system and our drug plan especially remains sustainable.
Doug, one for you. You talked about being in a practice setting where you were, originally in a practice setting where, there was no waiving copay, and then it moved to an environment where there was. You're in a new environment again, and you're being very successful in your pharmacy in Port Perry. My understanding is you charge the copay. So, talk to us a little bit about sort of that experience, and then also, what you do to talk to your patient about it when the question comes up, because it's a tough question for pharmacists to answer.
Well, sure. I think we probably have to look at a bit of the history that I went through. I enjoyed many years of collecting the copay in my former practice, and there were many times that I would step back and wonder what we were doing right to make this happen. One thing I did notice after we started waiving the copay is the pressure to cut costs. And I think Alan really sort of brought that point out. And it's one that should be sort of emphasized. We're removing, in the case of Ontario, we're removing approximately to almost 25% of your revenue when you're starting to waive that copay revenue paid by the Ministry of Health. And finances that only dictate that if you're reducing your revenue by 25%, you're going to have to reduce your cost by that corresponding amount in order to make ends meet. And I don't think there'd be an argument from too many people out there who've experienced going from waiving a copay to nothing, not waiving a copay to waiving a copay, but there have been some pretty significant changes as far as staffing in the pharmacy and the ability to provide excellent patient care. But one of the things and I'll comment on Alan because he has some really good points there. One of the things we have to remember is that we have done this to ourselves as a profession. We had choices as owners. To some extent, we had choices as staff pharmacists as well too. I think staff pharmacists can advocate as well by having the discussion with their owners and having them speak to the issues with regards to waiving copays because it affects them. The first thing that happens when you start taking away that kind of revenue is there's an impact on what's available left to pay a staff pharmacist or to pay a technician or to pay a support staff in the pharmacy. But it's all part of this, as I call it, the race to the bottom. And I think what we have to understand is that what happens when your colleague in pharmacy waives $3, then $4, and then waives the whole $6.11. I don't understand how you're doing that. What do you have to differentiate yourself when that happens? The only thing you have to fall back on is the professional services that you provide your patients. And my argument is if you start off with that, then you have nothing to lose.
Great, thanks, Doug. We have a question in the room. Raj in the second row. You had a question for our panelists? I'll repeat it, by the way.
My question was the loyalty points charge.
So the question was loyalty points in Ontario. They're not allowed, but this seems very similar because of copay waive still seems like an incentive. So, Alan, maybe I'll let you tackle that one. We don't have a regulator here, but I think you're probably the closest thing to it. So,
and I don't say I say that with the greatest respect for our regulators. I've actually had conversations with the regulators. I personally believe you're absolutely right that there really is no difference. Let's call it what it is. I see this no different If we're looking at a $2 copay that is being waived, it's analogous to you taking $2 out of your till, handing it over to your patient and asking it back. You're using that as an enticement to have the prescriptions filled in your pharmacy. To me, I don't care in a sense. I strongly believe it is an addition, and I will continue to advocate that with our regulators and with anyone that's willing to listen. Be quite frank.
Paul, where are pharmacists at in New Brunswick today? Has the environment changed considerably? Are we, are we looking at more pharmacists that sort of, maybe we're waiving the copay, then changed, and they stayed charging the copay again?
So, we're certainly in a down cycle here, I guess, in New Brunswick as a result of, especially the agreement sort of falling apart, I guess, around raffle production. So what we had happen was we had, and I won't name the chains, let's say, but we had, significant banner, I guess, or a chain that hadn't been waiving. And then after the agreement sort of fell apart, they began, from a competitive aspect, they were losing market share, and so they began to waive the copay. But saying that, I think I mentioned earlier that we had, we had some rural, probably about 40 communities in New Brunswick where there was just one pharmacy. And we've got a population shift occurring. Our population here is pretty stagnant, but it's been aging. Okay, so we still have less than 1 million people here in this province. But the average age is probably in the 48 years old range as opposed to, it was much younger years ago. And so, the consumer, in terms of number of prescriptions, our script volume is up and continues to rise. The small communities, are very similar to Ontario and other provinces where people are migrating to big cities, right? So the rural areas, we still have pharmacists who are not waiving, and in urban areas, Medicine, St. John, Miramichi, especially, people are waiving, right? So we're seeing that happening. I think I mentioned earlier, though, with respect to the new Pharmacy Act, we have a wide variety of services. We probably, taking Alberta aside, we have, as strong a Pharmacy Act in terms of extended scope as you can get. We just don't have any money here in terms of the payers, and we're not being reimbursed for any of those services. We do have, a government that's 2 years into a 4-year mandate that has made some election commitments. And in the first year, they really committed to trying to find savings and slashing the deficit. And the health minister was tasked with that project as well. So, he's been really part-time in the Department of Health, and now in the last 3 or 4 months, he's only dedicating himself to health. And had more frequent meetings, and so we're hopeful about where the next year is going to go, and certainly going into an election. But at this time, just from the copay perspective, I think there are more people now waiving copays, more stores now waiving than there were certainly 3 years ago. And it's certainly more urban than rural. Right?
Great. Well, thanks, Paul. And, the unfortunate truth, I guess. So we've got a number of questions that have come in over YouTube. Most are related and very similar to the question we had in the audience about loyalty points and that sort of thing. But a couple, and Paul, I won't give these to you because they're sort of Ontario regulatory kind of questions. But one is, if you're waiving the copay for ODD patients, doesn't that impact your regular fees, your usual and customary fee, and put you at risk to waive for private drug coverage? So, Doug, Alan?
Well, it certainly would be a tough sell to my patients if I were waiving a copay and then I had a drug that wasn't covered and I was charging my full fee on that. That would be I would probably find a difficult discussion to have. So I'm not sure how you would have that discussion with individuals, saying, well, why are you charging me this fee and if you're waiving this? Just to sort of extend what Alan was saying about waiving copays, about its impact, I think you could argue that waiving not only could negatively impact patient care due to decreased staffing, as he very astutely pointed out. But I would argue, and I've seen examples of this, as I'm sure many people who practice in Ontario, especially people who have a zero copay, it encourages unnecessary prescription utilization. And I do recognize the argument that the ability to pay is a challenge for some people, but we have to temper that with the concept that you have to have a skin in the game. There has to be, at least from the government's point of view, in order to keep utilization under control, there has to be something there to make sure that patients recognize that there's a cost to this service, and there needs to be sort of some cost sharing in that case. And in the private sector, that's already happening.
Alan?
First of all, I just nailed it. It reiterates the comment I made in my opening statement, and that is that price really only becomes an issue when there's an absence of value proposition. And we need to do a much better job at articulating and promoting ourselves and propping ourselves and being proud of what it is we do each and every day. By waiving copays, we commoditize the act, and it's no different from, we're sending a message that says, it's just another product. It might as well be hardware. We're just going to keep discounting. So we need to be proud of what we do. It's important work that we do with healthcare. To go back to your earlier comment, your earlier question being the impact of waiving with regards to other types of prescriptions, I think it's important not to lose sight of the fact that many private payer plans actually mirror the ODB plan and will stipulate that if whatever you do in ODB, you need to do with our clients, privately covered clients. So you need to watch and read your pharmacy contracts that you have with private payers to make sure that you're not going down this slippery slope.
Yeah, I definitely agree, because when you look at the private payer world, I mean, being treated equally is very important to them, and certainly the risk level for me goes way up, from the perspective of their expectation of us, and obviously would make future negotiations a little bit more difficult if they knew that they weren't being treated fairly. So
I don't think that risk can actually be emphasized enough, quite honestly. I think some people are waiving based on the fact that they're able to charge a full fee to the private payers. But I think we're in an environment now where the private payers are getting more tired of it. And I think it'll just be, in the very near future, where they say, if you're waiving and you're advertising it, then we want the same deal.
absolutely. So, another question that actually came in off YouTube, and again, it's very regulatory in nature, but isn't giving patients bus tokens and parking, which is actually sort of a gray area, I guess, when it comes to regulatory, effectively the same thing as waiving copay.
I would, again, like my previous statement, I quite simply say that these are incentives. You are giving something away for free as an incentive to get your prescriptions filled at my pharmacy, and I think we need to have. It's time to reopen that discussion. There's been a lot of grief around this. I think we need to tackle it once and for all.
I think, and with all due respect to my colleagues that are in the regulatory field, including the Ontario College of Pharmacists, especially the very hardworking volunteers that try to regulate our profession as a self-regulating profession that we are, I think we need to do a better job. I think we need to recognize that when it comes to copays, that waiving $2 is the same as me giving somebody $2 or giving them a bus token or paying for their parking. I don't understand how that can be differentiated, and I'm wondering at what point, where's the cutoff point? What is the difference between that and a loyalty point, as far as I'm concerned? In my mind, there's no difference at all.
So, John, I disagree on this one. Let's follow your instructions. I know you're out there to lose this for a second.
Yeah, you're welcome.
It's not the first time, Paul.
I mean, when I hear about talking to
I'm inclined to agree. I think I go back to my earlier statement, though. It's clearly, well, maybe it's not clearly defined. I would quite say it's clear as mud. We need to reopen this discussion. It's not cut and dry. I think there are some situations, and I think we all need to recognize that there are going to be patients that have hardships, true documented hardships, and no one is suggesting that you can't exercise a little bit of compassion on a one-off basis. That said, I think we need to all have a clear set of rules and guidelines, and I think right now it's still very unclear as to what is permitted, what is not. To bring it back to our discussion of the day, co-payment, I think co-payment waiving is an absolute inducement.
You know, you do bring a valid point, and I would tend to agree with your point that way. Again, to a limited point. I think the issue is that why is it up to us to provide that parking? Why is in a lot of cases when we're in pharmacies that are paying for parking, it's because the doctors are charging for the office. Why are the doctors doing it? Why? Who would even think of walking to their dentist, being handed the dentist bill and say, "Can you waive that $20 for me from that $400 bill?" No one does that. Why is it unique to pharmacy? And I think therein lies the question.
So we are getting into the final minutes of the discussion, and before we go to final comments, I have a question as well, and it's really just for Paul and Alan as association leads. Is this, or are these issues association issues? Like, is it really the association that should be leading this charge? Is it pharmacists, or is it somebody else?
So my previous my opening comments, I said this is not that professional associations can't mandate, we can't force anyone to do anything. I've said many times that it's every pharmacy owner's right to make good or bad decisions. I say that with any business. And there are, I think what the association's role is to work and help to facilitate maybe this is part of the solutions that need to be applied to help pharmacies transition from a waiving state to a non-waiving state. I think it's looking for those supports, looking for the words. Sometimes it's just a simple matter of, please help me explain, how do I talk to my patients, and how do I make this jump. It's not easy. I don't have the answers. If I did, we would have had we had this solved a long time ago. These are very difficult discussions. I think the Pharmacy Association's role is one of support. Is we will continue to advocate for the additional scopes of practice and opportunities for pharmacists. But we can only do that in a sustainable business model. And so I think ours is one of support and continue ongoing efforts.
Paul agreed.
I agree with most of what Alan's saying there. I guess I think the question you're asking, we have certain regulations here in the province that aren't really being enforced. I talked earlier about the fact that pharmacies and runs shall collect, or shall charge against rating, so that's not being enforced. And so, we'll continue here to work on the government in that respect. I think we have a role to play with respect to, proving the value of what we're advocating. So to say, I'm not sure if it's copay in Ontario or if it's just a percentage, but we think that the percentage as a policy objective is the way to go, and it's in the government's interest as well. And so we need to continue to advocate, make those points. We created an event here, I guess, it happened to be that on October 1st, we're going to make this change, part of our new agreement in 2014. And for some, especially smaller rural pharmacies, that was the catalyst that they needed. It's tough to make the change. It's hard to introduce this change to your patients without having them point the finger at you directly. And so we created an event that, for lack of a better term, it says, look, if we have this agreement, we're going to start enforcing. And it's the association that goes in front of that.
Doug, final word goes to you. This, in a lot of cases, becomes a competitive issue amongst pharmacies out there, but sometimes you just got to do what's right. And give the final word from you.
What I've been trying to do, especially over the last several months that I've been in independent practice, is to get away from that term competitor. I like to use the term colleague. Doctors don't refer to each other as competitors. Dentists don't refer to each other as competitors. I think we're colleagues. And I think, and maybe this is altruistic, I think the vast majority of the practitioners in pharmacy in Ontario want to help their patients. They want to do the right thing. And in my mind, collecting copay gives you a very valuable tool to be able to do.
So just a couple of final words. First of all, thanks to our panelists, Alan Malik from the Ontario Pharmacists Association, Doug Brown from up in Fort Perry, and Paul Blanchard on the phone from New Brunswick. And just so everybody knows, we will be posting the video. I understand there might have been a few little audio glitches and stuff. We'll try and clean those up, but we'll sort of let everybody know when the video's up and posted and whatnot. If you liked what you saw tonight, if you liked what you heard, let us know as well, because right now, we've got a ton of different important issues in our profession happening right now. I mean, everything from opioid issues across this country. They're all things that I think all of you want to hear about and talk about, and we want to be the avenue to do that for pharmacy. So thanks again. Thanks to everybody here in our audience, quite a crowd. And for those of you that want to continue the conversation on Twitter, hashtag, as I said, is #MayWaiveCopay. So good night, everybody, and thanks for tuning in. Really appreciate the support.